Moving on to our first discussion, Nigeria's foreign policy can be traced to periods of the country's existence. Now, these periods are the colonial period and the post-colonial period as well. The colonial period between 1914 and 1960 is when the entity called Nigeria came into existence as a united nation, even though the country was still under colonial rule. The post-colonial period is from independence in 1960 till date. Now, the post-colonial period saw the formation of the indigenous foreign policy that was truly called Nigerian foreign policy. And right here in the studio, we have a career diplomat in the studio, the author of the book titled With Heart and Might, Ambassador M.K. Ibrahim. He joins us to share his 33 years experience in the Nigerian diplomatic service. Good morning and welcome to Daybreak.
Thank you very much.
It's nice to have you on the program this morning.
Thank you for having me. This will be the first interview I'm having since the launch of my book.
Oh, very interesting.
Great.
Now, before we go into, your book, 33 years, that's quite a very long time, isn't it? Could you share your experience with us through this time?
Well, that's a big challenge to summarize 33 years in 5 minutes. I wish I could attempt that. But just like many things in Nigeria, I found myself in the diplomatic service, probably by accident. When I graduated from the university in 1977, I had about 6 jobs waiting for me.
Wow.
And among these 6 jobs, my ambition as a youth at that time were either to be a journalist, a banker, or a diplomat. And by coincidence, among the 6 offers that I got, these 3 were among them. And now it was a question of trying to choose one among these 3. And I had to go through prayers, asking my parents to help me choose one, which they couldn't. But by coincidence, I started with journalism, and within 1 month, I found that it was not a career that I should pursue.
Oh, no.
It was during the military regime, and one journalist got his head shaved off by General, by Obasanjo at that period.
Wow.
And my own impression of journalism was I was thinking like the journalists in Washington,
Where there is democracy.
Yes, where you have the freedom of writing, freedom of expression,
Right.
writing things as long as you stay within the rules, of journalism.
Right.
But, I say, no, I wouldn't like anyone to shave my hair. So I left that one and I went to banking. And within 1 month, I found myself in police cell.
My goodness.
We made a payment.
What an experience.
Yeah. We made a payment that shouldn't have been made.
Oh, wow.
It was a contractor who did the job for 20,000 naira. And at that time, 20,000 naira
money.
was more than $20,000. So I approved that he should be paid. I didn't know that the check had been stopped. After he had been paid, then we discovered that I shouldn't have authorized the payment.
Wow.
Well, eventually it went to the police and I was taken to the cell with 3 other people. Immediately the case was resolved. The money was returned. I said bye-bye. And then came to the diplomatic service. Incidentally, I reported at the ministry on the last day, 30th of August, 1978. That was the closing date for newly recruited foreign service officers. I managed to make it, so you can see a lot of...
Quite an experience.
Yes, indeed. All right, now the title of your book is With Heart and Might, and we know, book titles actually play a huge role, for authors. What influenced, that particular title?
I tell you, I had toyed with not less than 100 titles. And how this one came to me was like an inspiration, something coming from somewhere. It was from, it is from the national anthem of Nigeria, the second stanza, to serve your country with heart and mind. So many people, when they see heart and mind, they keep wondering, why did I hear this, even though they have been reciting the national anthem every day?
Indeed.
You know? So in essence, this is to say that I have served my country with my heart and my mind, with all my abilities, in spite of the difficulty, the obstacle, the pains. You know, I did my best for my country, and I am proud of that.
Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at, this particular book which you launched a few days ago. And in chapter 3, specifically, you talked about the military rule and the transition to democracy in 1979. And the book also talked about how the long period of military took its toll on the civil service generally. Now, considering the kind of civil service we have now, do you think we're still suffering from the hangover of the military era?
Well, a lot in many areas. The civil service is supposed to be guided by rules. When I joined the service and before my time, one of the biggest attributes of the service was security of tenure. You know that you will be having your job unless you have done something that is serious, that is considered as a serious misconduct. Nobody will come overnight and throw you out. Even when you commit an offense, you are given an opportunity, to defend yourself. You are given a query, you answer the query, a panel will sit down, and until you are adjudged that you are guilty of what you are being charged before an appropriate punishment was meted on you. When the military came, it was a different thing. For the first time, Nigerians were hearing with immediate effect. Actions were taken with immediate effect, without due consultation, without being guided by the rules, and people were shocked. And in many ways, that brought corruption. That was the beginning of corruption in the civil service. People tried to help themselves, and so they thought that we have to do something before our retirement. Before then, you are sure you will work up to the age of 60 or so. You will retire, you will get your pension, and you will leave the service happily, But all of a sudden, there's a new development that one young officer, maybe a major or a colonel, will just come in the morning and you will say you are retired. Or you will just hear on the radio that these names mentioned on the radio, these officers have been terminated with immediate effect. And people try now to get their pension while they are still in the service. You try to get your gratuity while you are still in the service because they are no longer security of tenure. The military regime is gone. We are now in a democracy, but still the same thing is happening, especially in state governments. Decisions were taken to retire, to send off, to reduce the number of civil servants without due consideration to the rules, of procedures. I think it is important that we go back to the practice in the past. It's a kind of contractual obligation between the employer and the employee. And if that is no longer kept, then confidence is lost.
Okay. Really, really very interesting. Now, still in your book, on page 60, the book talked about Nigerian foreign policy between 1960 and 1966, which was, quite conservative. Now, in your assessment, what is there a difference, between successive governments with regard to bilateral relations with other countries? What was it like?
Well, the differences are not much. One could probably excuse the First Republic leaders because they were barely 6 years in government and they are new. Nigeria was a very young nation. Most of them had modest education, but very, very patriotic. That's the major difference between the Tafawa Balewa leaders and then today. Now politicians come with letters and their name, PhD, this and that, but their productivity is much lower than the First Republic politicians. The difference was patriotism. These people walked with their heart and might, probably, if I would say so.
The title of the book.
As against what we are having, today. And another reason is they are not as exposed as our leaders of today. They only knew the British system, British colonizers. The educational background was purely British. Their contact and exposure was purely British. So it was understandable if in their action they only thought of British way of doing things. So that was how the First Republic politicians found themselves. For example, in 1958, 2 years before our independence, we agreed to sign the Anglo-Nigerian Defense Pact, even before our independence. And it was one of the agreements signed before as a condition for our independence. The Defense Pact meant allowing the British to have a base in Nigeria, and in two places in particular, Lagos and Kano. Air base in Kano and naval and the ground troops, in Lagos. But immediately after independence, Nigeria, and in particular because of the reaction of students, they didn't want Nigeria to be a base of any colonial power. They wanted Nigeria to play its neutrality and its foreign policy to be non-aligned. Because of pressure imposed on the government, mainly by students, we had to abrogate the pact. So it wasn't easy, for them at that time, but it had to be done because of pressure from students and other the newspapers and people with radical views. In a sense, that was good because as early as that period, what meant was we had a government that was listening to the reaction, was listening to the voice of the people. Probably if this had happened today, with all the opposition, with all the complaints, with all the cries of people, it would not have the same effect as it did immediately after independence, which is to say that the government at that time was probably more responsive, than probably what we have today.
Oh, you talked about, patriotism back in the days and what we have now. A lot of people, you'll agree with me that a lot of Nigerians are not patriotic anymore. In your assessment, what really has changed? What has changed about, patriotism?
Many things. My first diplomatic posting was to the Soviet Union. And the first thing I found then was children as early as the age of 3 were taken away every year for a few months from their parents. They are called the young communists. They were taught the value or loving their country. They were national values. They were taught to make sacrifice for their countries. They were taught to believe that the country would take care of them, that the country is worth dying for, that your country is more than anything, is above anything. In the case of Soviet Union at that time, it was even beyond religion or even God. It was country, motherland. And once you grow up with that in your mind, call it propaganda, call it whatever, and you see the government also doing something for you. They had free education, you are guaranteed a job, you are guaranteed a house, but it was a kind of a contract between you and the state. While the state had to discharge its own part of the contract, you as a citizen also had your own to discharge. I'm talking about the former Soviet Union. And later, many years, when I went to Sweden, that's not a communist government, it's a very liberal country, but again, different from other Western countries. People were willing to pay as much as 70% of their income as tax for the state. People were willing to make all kinds of sacrifice. On the side of the government has responsibility to take care of its citizens from cradle to grave. In fact, most Swedes look forward with pleasure to the age of retirement. You know, you will have your house, you will have good medical treatment. At a certain stage, those who are terminally ill in Sweden, they move to a hospital closer to their houses, where we just press a button, 2 or 3 doctors will come, no matter what time it is. So you have no regret whatever you have done for your country. And the young ones, when they see that, they know it is worth doing everything, even if it means paying the ultimate price for the nation. I'm afraid it's not the same thing in our country. There are people who have made all kinds of sacrifice, including their lives. I have written in this book some of my colleagues who had died on active service in a plane crash, almost 20 of them. And there's no place, even within our ministry, a plague where their names are listed to say these people paid the ultimate price in the service of the nation. In fact, so sad, a child of one of those who died came to the ministry. He wanted to see the permanent secretary. And the wife came with the son of one of the deceased, and they were not even allowed to go into the ministry. She was asked, do you have an appointment? He said, no. He said, but my husband died in a plane crash while serving the nation. He was a staff in this ministry. The poor security people at the gate, madam, you have no appointment, you have no appointment. Go and get an appointment. Well, this is not to say this happens every day. This could be an extreme example, but this is the reality. You go to every establishment, whether government or even the private sector, you find this kind of experiences from these workers. And that does not encourage people to be patriotic. So if you want patriotism from the citizens, then the government also has a responsibility, to instill in the minds of the people that for hard work, for patriotism, the government will, on its part, make sure that you live a decent life. You have no cause to regret.
Okay. Okay, now over the years, Nigeria's foreign policy has actually been marred by image crisis nationally and internationally. How do you think we can actually salvage it?
I thank you for asking this question. I, during the launch of my book, I thought I would have the opportunity, to raise certain critical issues. I couldn't raise these issues, but one of them was a question of image of Nigeria. When I was a student, I traveled to UK a couple of times. I didn't have to go for visa interview with the British High Commission or British Council. The university just collected our passports, took to the British Council. They gave us visa, we went, and came back. And many Nigerians will remember when they used to get visa at the airports of many countries on arrival. Things have changed a great deal. And unfortunately, this issue is mainly due to attitudes, of Nigerians themselves. Now, when I joined the service in the foreign ministry at post, we had officers who were doing economic issues, trade matters, political matters, military. But now, everybody from the ambassador, who is the highest official there, to the lowest person, is engaged in consular responsibilities. What is this consular responsibilities? Nigerians are in jail here. Nigerians are involved in one kind of crime or the other, financial crime, money laundering, and all kinds of things. That is why everybody is involved. My last posting was Libya. And believe me, every day, we had to deal with cases of Nigerians taking the risk of crossing the desert and then taking even greater risk of going through the Mediterranean, to an island in Italy. More than 70% of those embarking on this journey die. But that is not enough to discourage people. And if you go to Southeast Asia today, you find that majority of those who are in prison on drug issues, are Nigerians. It is so bad that in many countries, Nigerians are not even given the benefit of the doubt. In other places, you commit an offense, they will look at it and see whether their intention in doing it, is it true that you have committed this offense? But once you are in Nigeria now, you are not even given this benefit of the doubt. It's really, really so sad. In the diplomatic service, we are selling our country. We want our country to look good. But unfortunately, if your product is bad, there's very little you can do. You may succeed in selling to one or two people, but by the time they start using this product, they find that it's not good enough. It's an example of the kind of challenge that we have. This is beyond the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, probably beyond even the government itself. It has to do with every Nigerian. It has to do with the government, it has to do with religious institutions, it has to do with academic institutions, it has to do with our judiciary, it has to do with our politicians. We must sit down and ask ourselves these questions. How do we regain the respect that we had? How? How do we do it? It's a big question.
All right, now, what's your take on China, Nigeria, or even Africa's relationship? Because a lot of people seem to think that, Nigeria is mortgaging its future to, China.
Well, I'm not an expert on China, even though I had served in Hong Kong, which is now part of China. I was a consul general in Hong Kong. But in international relations, it's all the same thing, whether it's China or you're referring to the United States, You look at your national interest in whatever you're doing. It's not a blind game. It's not a zero-sum game. You look at your interest. As long as your action is based on your national interest, even where there is an error, there will always be a room to rectify this error. In international relations, you deal with other states, it's give and take. If China is giving you a loan, they are not doing it because they love you per se, but they also have their national interest. You look at your own national interest also. There's nothing bad in taking the loan, but what do you use the loan for? I'm a retired person, and probably I have the privilege, of speaking my mind. I know we have borrowed a lot of money to build, trains. When we were kids, there was train in Nigeria, and those who are driving this train were Nigerians, either a coal or I don't know whatever they were doing to power this train, but they were Nigerians. 60, 70 years later, now we borrowed money to build, railways, and we have trains. But I see Chinese driving this train. What is there in driving a train? That you have to get Chinese driving train, which Nigerians were doing 70, 80 years ago. Even Nigerians can fly aircraft, fighter jets, but they cannot drive train that is on a track, one way, like that. For goodness sake, there is something wrong. If you sign a contract which says, we're lending you 10 million naira, we're going to provide you with a certain machine, but my people will operate this machine. If you accept this, it means you are depriving your people also the opportunity. You can't be fighting unemployment while you are signing this kind of contract. Unfortunately, this is the kind of thing that we see.
I would like for you to share this experience. There's a particular chapter in your book, I think chapter 4, where you talked about your experience with Ambassador Ukebu. Now, according to you, you went into prayers to seek Allah's protection. Talk to us about that.
No, I think, well, for those of us who are brought up, and I have mentioned it in the book, you think that even issues that should be done by you as a human being, you push it to the Almighty to do it for you, which is not bad as long as you are doing it faithfully and believing that you are doing the right thing. The permanent secretary, I had never met him, but he summoned me, and when I faced him, he called me a communist. And that was a very, very serious charge in those days. It's as good as someone now calling you a terrorist. But while I was in the university, I was in a socialist club. And indeed, I was the secretary general of that, club. So somehow, the permanent secretary wanted, to send me to Soviet Union, Moscow. And they thought that the best person to send there was someone who has that kind of
Entirely.
thinking someone who has this kind of ideological framework, and they looked around and said, oh, this guy will be very good for that place. But he didn't tell me why he wanted me. And immediately I saw him, he came out with this charge, you are a communist. And I thought that was the end of my career. And you recall I told you that I tried journalism. I had to leave. I went to the bank. I said, oh my God, that is the end of this one. So Ukegu was a very, very tough permanent secretary. People were dead scared of him. So when I heard he wanted to see me, I had to pray, and immediately I went in. I had to pray again to disable whatever intention he had, bad intention he had against me. It worked well anyway, finally.
All right, now, just before we go on a quick break, could you share experience with us? You were actually part of a delegation with the late head of state back then, General Sani Abacha, in March 1994 to New Delhi in India. Just share your experience with us.
Thank you. There are a lot of lessons to learn from that trip. And I think these lessons are still very, very important. Abacha, when he became president, unlike many other presidents for quite some time, he did not leave Nigeria. He just stayed. And the trip to New Delhi was his first trip. And it was a conference, South-South conference of 15 countries. And there are a lot of documents, to read. And the president needed, the head of state needed to be briefed thoroughly because he will meet his counterparts to discuss these issues. And we thought on our way, we couldn't find the opportunity to sit with him and brief him while in Nigeria because of so many constraints. But on the plane from Jeddah, which was a transit point to New Delhi, about 6 hours, it was arranged that we will sit and brief him. There were about 7 ministers on the plane. And he came out, the ministers came, each one of them with his file, briefing notes, and those of us who were the staff, stayed behind to take notes or to chip in something. And we started this briefing. 10 minutes after, General Abacha just got up. He didn't tell anybody anything. He just went, he just went to his private room in the plane. And the ministers who waited 30 minutes, 1 hour, Abacha didn't show up. And we knew he was not likely to come back, So the ministers were tired, and they went back to their seat and were asked, to go and sit and watch out. Anytime Abacha is coming out, go and call me. And he didn't come out until when it was announced that the plane was descending. Well, the following day, the meeting started. And of course, without proper briefing, no matter how hardworking, intelligent, the head of delegation is, will be missing certain points. Why I'm saying that there is a lesson to learn, and it still happens. When Nigeria goes for international meetings, normally our heads of delegations are not properly briefed. One of the presidents, from my own experience, that I will give praise to was President Yaradua. President Yaradua will sit down with you and ask questions. In fact, you dare not go to President Yaradua for briefing without doing your homework because he will ask you vital questions. He will ask you what is Nigeria's position, what is the position of South Africa, what is the position of Egypt, why do you think we are taking this position? He will put you on the spot. The first time we did that, everybody knew that we had a president who would not be taken for granted. And from the minister to the officers, everybody started doing a very, very serious job. Unfortunately, this tradition has not been sustained because every head of state, every president has his own way of handling matters. But may his soul rest in peace. Yaradua was a great person in terms of listening, asking questions, and preparing himself well, for international conferences.
Thank you so much for coming to the program this morning. Unfortunately, we have to stop here.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that was, a really, really interesting one. Really, really interesting, I must say. And we just finished interviewing a career diplomat, the author of the book titled With Heart and Might, Ambassador M.K. Ibrahim. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back briefly.